Clara Whitmore's hands were shaking when she pointed the shotgun at the stranger standing in her barn door. She hadn't fired a weapon since the night her husband died. But the drought had made desperate people out of decent ones, and she wasn't about to lose what little she had left. Then the man stepped aside, and behind him stood a barefoot little girl, dust in her hair, holding a baby goat that couldn't stand on its own. Clara lowered the gun. That single moment of mercy would cost her everything she had left. If this story touches your heart, subscribe to our channel and stay until the very end. Drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Clara Whitmore pulled the hammer back on her late husband's shotgun and pressed her shoulder against the barn doorframe. 3 weeks since the well ran dry. 2 weeks since somebody stole what was left of her feed grain in the night. She hadn't slept proper in days. Her left leg ached from the old burn, the one that left her with a limp she couldn't hide no matter how hard she tried. The heat made it worse. Everything was worse in this heat. The knocking came again. Slow. Deliberate. Not the kind that meant trouble, but Clara had learned the hard way that trouble didn't always announce itself. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice steadier than her hands. "Ma'am?" A man's voice, low, rough at the edges, careful. "I was told you might have shade." Shade. Not water, not food, not shelter. Shade. Clara almost laughed. In a town tearing itself apart over water rights, this stranger was asking for shade like it was all he deserved. She reached for the latch with her free hand and pulled the barn door open. The girl was the first thing she saw. Small, 7 years old maybe. Sun-freckled face, cracked lips, bare feet black with road dust. She was holding a baby goat against her chest, a scrawny thing with its ribs showing through patchy fur. Behind the girl stood a man, tall, lean in a way that said he'd been eating last, if at all. His clothes were travel-worn, but not ragged. His hat was pulled low, but his eyes, Clara noticed his eyes. They moved like a man who was used to reading rooms before he entered them. He didn't step forward, didn't push past the doorframe, didn't look at the shotgun like most men would, with either challenge or fear. He just waited. "I don't need your house," he said. "Just a corner of this barn so my daughter doesn't sleep in the road tonight." Clara looked at the girl again. The girl looked back at her. Didn't say a word, just held that dying goat a little tighter. Clara lowered the shotgun. "One night," she said. "One night," he agreed. She stepped aside. And that was the decision that would set the whole town of Wind Hollow against her. His name was Ethan Hale. He told her that much while she pumped what was left of the cistern water into a tin cup for the girl. "And her?" Clara nodded toward the child, who'd already sat down cross-legged in the straw, the goat curled in her lap. "Lily." He said the name like it was the only soft thing he had left. "She's mine." "Her mother?" "Gone. 3 years now." Clara handed the cup to Lily, who looked up at her father before drinking. He gave a small nod. Lily drank. "You came from where?" Clara asked, turning back to him. "East of Prescott. Before that, up north." "That's a long walk with a child." "It is." He didn't offer more. Clara didn't push. She'd buried a husband. She understood the weight of questions you didn't want answered. "There's a blanket on that hook," she said, pointing to the far wall. "Smells like horse, but it's clean enough. Don't light anything in here. Hay catches fast." "Yes, ma'am." She turned to leave, got 2 steps before his voice stopped her. "Ma'am." She looked back. "Thank you." 2 words, said plain. No performance in it, no groveling. Just a man who meant what he said and nothing more. Clara nodded once and walked back to the house. She didn't lock the barn. She didn't know why. Morning came mean. The sun hit the valley like a punishment. By 7 o'clock, the air was already thick enough to chew. Clara stood on her porch and watched the dust rise off the road that ran past her property into town. Wind Hollow wasn't much. A general store, a church, a saloon, a schoolhouse that doubled as the town meeting hall. And at the center of it all, Mayor Raymond Cutter's office, sitting right next to the only working reservoir in 20 miles. Cutter had been mayor for 6 years, elected the first time because he promised water infrastructure, re-elected because by then he controlled the water supply and nobody dared vote against the man who decided whether your cattle drank. Clara knew this. Every rancher in Wind Hollow knew this. But knowing and doing something about it were two different animals entirely. She heard the barn door creak open behind her. Ethan stepped out, Lily at his side. The girl had somehow gotten the baby goat to stand. It wobbled on stick-thin legs, but it stood. "She's stubborn," Lily said, looking up at Clara with a gap-toothed grin. "The goat?" Clara asked. "Her name is Biscuit, and yes, ma'am, she's real stubborn. Papa says that's how you know something's worth keeping." Clara glanced at Ethan. He was looking at the dried-up creek bed that ran along the edge of her property. "That creek used to run year-round?" he asked. "Used to. Dried up about 2 years back, right around the time Cutter started his water contracts." Ethan said nothing, but his jaw tightened in a way Clara recognized. It was the look of a man doing math he didn't like. "I said one night," Clara reminded him. "You did." "Sun's up." "It is." Silence sat between them like a third person. Then Lily tugged on Clara's sleeve. "Miss Clara, your garden's dying." Clara looked at the patch of dirt beside the house where she'd tried to keep tomatoes alive. The plants were brown, wilted, barely holding on. She'd rationed every drop she had, but the drought didn't care about effort. "I know, sweetheart," Clara said. "Biscuit and me could help. I'm good with plants. Mama taught me before she went to heaven." Clara felt something crack behind her ribs. Not break. Crack. The way a door cracks open that's been sealed shut too long. She looked at Ethan. He didn't ask to stay, didn't argue, just stood there, letting his daughter do what daughters do. Find the softest spot in the hardest person and press on it. "I reckon one more day won't hurt," Clara said. Lily smiled. Ethan tipped his hat. "I noticed your irrigation trough out back is split along the bottom. I can fix that if you've got tools." "I've got tools. I don't have charity." "Ain't charity, ma'am. It's trade. Shade for labor. Fair enough?" Clara studied him. Every instinct she had, built from years of surviving alone, told her to send him away. But every instinct she'd had since her husband died had been built on fear, and she was getting tired of living inside that. "Tool shed's around the side," she said. "Don't break anything that ain't already broken." "Yes, ma'am." By noon, Ethan had the irrigation trough pulled apart, the cracked board replaced with a piece of oak he'd found in the scrap pile, and the whole thing sealed with pine tar he'd mixed himself. Clara watched from the porch. She didn't want to admit it, but the man worked like somebody who understood what things needed before being told. He didn't hammer loud, didn't make a show of effort. He just fixed what was broken and moved to the next thing. Lily, meanwhile, had taken to the tomato patch like it was her personal mission. She dug a shallow trench around each plant and lined it with flat stones to hold whatever moisture the soil had left. "Where'd you learn that?" Clara asked, coming down the steps. "Mama had a garden in Missouri. She said plants are like people. They do better when you stop the good things from running away." Clara's throat tightened. She turned back toward the house before the girl could see her face. That was the moment Margaret Doyle's wagon rolled past. Margaret didn't stop. She didn't wave. She just looked, long and slow, at the man working in Clara's yard, at the little girl kneeling in Clara's garden, at the goat nibbling at Clara's fence post. Then Margaret snapped her reins and kept going, her mouth set in a line that could cut glass. Clara knew what that look meant. By sundown, the whole town would know she had a man living on her property. She was right. The next morning, Clara walked into the general store for salt and flour. The conversation stopped the second she came through the door. Harold Perkins, who ran the store, leaned against the counter. Two women, Agnes Pike and Doris Weber, stood near the bolts of fabric, their hands still, their eyes busy. "Morning, Clara," Harold said. Too careful, too polite. "Morning. I need salt and a pound of flour." Agnes Pike cleared her throat. "Heard you've got company out at your place." "Heard wrong. I've got a man fixing my irrigation in exchange for barn space. That's business, not company." "Business," Doris repeated, her eyebrows doing all the talking her mouth wouldn't. "Last time I checked, a widow's allowed to hire help." "Hire," Agnes again. "With what, Clara? Everybody knows your well's dry." Clara set her money on the counter. "My business is my business, Agnes. Same as yours is yours. Unless you'd like to talk about where your husband was last Tuesday night when he wasn't at the saloon." Agnes's face went red. Harold bagged the salt and flour without another word. Clara took her things and left. Her hands were steady. Her leg was not. She made it to the wagon before her jaw started shaking. Not from fear, but from the effort of keeping her voice level when everything inside her wanted to scream. Because she hadn't done anything wrong. She'd offered a child a roof and a man fair work. And for that, she could already feel the town's judgment closing around her like a fist. That evening, Clara sat on the porch steps and watched the sun bleed out across the ridgeline. Lily was inside the barn, singing to Biscuit. Some song her mother taught her. Clara couldn't make out the words, only the melody, sweet and thin, like water over smooth stone. Ethan came around the corner of the house, wiping his hands on a rag. "Trough's done. Should hold through the rest of the summer if the heat don't crack it again." "Thank you." He sat on the bottom step, not next to her, below her, giving her the high ground without being asked. "Town's talking," Clara said. "I know." "Margaret Doyle came by again this afternoon. Didn't stop, just looked." "That's how it starts," Ethan said quietly. Clara glanced to him. "How what starts?" "The pressure, the looking, the whispering. They don't come at you direct. Not at first. They just make sure you know you're being watched. So you start policing yourself." "You talk like a man who's seen it before." "I have." "Where?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Different town. Same kind of people." Clara let that sit. "I need to tell you something," she said. He waited. "I ain't afraid of gossip. I buried my husband and ran this ranch alone for 4 years with a leg that don't work right and a town that stopped helping me the day the casket went in the ground. Gossip don't scare me." She turned to look at him. "But if you're hiding something, if there's a reason a man like you is wandering back roads with a 7-year-old and a goat, I need to know now. Because if trouble's coming, I'd rather meet it standing up." Ethan held her gaze. His eyes were steady, but somewhere behind them, Clara saw something shift. A door opening or closing. She couldn't tell which. "I'm not running from trouble," he said. "Then what are you doing in Wind Hollow?" "I came here for a reason, ma'am. And when the time's right, You'll know it." "That ain't an answer." "It's the only one I've got tonight." Clara stood up. Her leg protested. She didn't let it show. "You can stay through the week, but I want honesty, Mr. Hale. I've had enough of men who talk in circles." "Fair enough." She went inside. She didn't lock the door. She didn't know why. 3 days passed. Ethan fixed the barn's sagging east wall. He repaired the chicken coop. He rehung the front gate that had been dragging in the dirt for 2 years. Every morning he was up before Clara, and every evening he sat on that same bottom step, hat in his hands, watching the light go. Lily followed Clara everywhere. She helped wash linens. She swept the porch. She talked to Biscuit like the goat understood every word. And maybe she did, because that goat was getting stronger by the day. Clara caught herself smiling once. She stopped immediately, because smiling meant softening, and softening meant trusting, and trusting had cost her before. The burn on her leg was proof enough of what happened when you let your guard down around things that seemed warm. But Lily wasn't a fire. Lily was a child, and children didn't deserve the weight of a grown woman's fear. On the 4th morning, Clara woke to voices outside. She pulled on her boots and stepped onto the porch. 3 men on horseback. Town men. Clara recognized Frank Dunbar, who worked for Mayor Cutter. Beside him were Lyle Morrison and a younger man she didn't know. Ethan was already standing in the yard, his body between the riders and the barn where Lily was sleeping. "Morning, gentlemen," Ethan said. His voice carried no fear and no invitation. Frank Dunbar leaned forward in his saddle. "You the one staying on Whitmore land?" "I am." "Doing what, exactly?" "Working." "Working." Frank smiled, the kind of smile that wasn't one. "Funny. Nobody in town hired you. Nobody knows your name. And the widow ain't exactly known for taking in strays." "She ain't taking in strays. She's got a man doing honest work for honest shelter. Anything else you need?" Frank looked past Ethan at Clara on the porch. "Clara, Mayor Cutter's concerned about your situation. Says a woman alone shouldn't be housing an unknown man. Sends his regards and his advice. Send this one packing before things get complicated." Clara's grip tightened on the porch rail. "You tell Raymond Cutter that my land is my land. And the day I take advice from a man who charges widows double for water is the day they put me in the ground next to my husband." Frank's smile disappeared. "That's a hard thing to say, Clara." "It's a true thing to say, Frank. Now get off my property before I remember where I put my husband's rifle." The 3 men exchanged looks. Frank pulled his horse around. "Cutter ain't a patient man, Clara. You know that." "Neither am I." They rode off. Dust swirled behind them like a warning. Ethan turned to Clara. Something in his face had changed. A tightness, a calculation. A man making a decision he hadn't planned to make yet. "He sent them," Ethan said, not a question. "He always sends them first. That's how Raymond works. First, it's advice. Then it's threats. Then, it's action." "What kind of action?" Clara's hand went unconsciously to her left leg. "The burn. The barn fire 4 years ago that killed her husband and nearly killed her. The fire that everyone said was an accident." "The kind that looks like an accident," she said. Ethan stared at her, and for the first time since he'd arrived, Clara saw something in his eyes that wasn't patience or control. It was anger. Cold, deep, and deliberate. "How long has he been doing this?" Ethan asked. "Doing what?" "Running this town like it belongs to him." Clara laughed, short, bitter, exhausted. "Since before my husband died. Since before the drought." Raymond Cutter don't run Wind Hollow, Mr. Hale. He owns it. Every well, every contract, every drop of water that comes through that reservoir passes through his hands. And anyone who questions it either shuts up or dries up. Ethan was quiet for a long time. Then he said something Clara didn't expect. "Show me the reservoir." "What?" "The reservoir, where Cutter controls the water. Show me." "Why?" "Because I need to see something." "See what?" He looked at her, direct, unguarded, the first time he dropped whatever wall he kept between himself and the world. Whether this town can still be saved. Clara studied him. This man who'd asked for shade, who fixed things without being asked, who sat on the bottom step, who put his body between riders and his sleeping daughter without hesitation. "Who are you?" she whispered. "I'm the man sleeping in your barn, ma'am. That's all I am tonight." "And tomorrow?" "Tomorrow depends on what I see." Clara's chest was tight. Her instincts were screaming, half of them to run, half of them to stay. She chose the half she'd been ignoring for 4 years. "I'll show you at first light," she said. Ethan nodded. Inside the barn, Lily's voice drifted out, still singing that same soft melody. And Biscuit the goat stood on her own 4 legs, steady now, eating from Lily's hand. Clara turned and went inside. She locked the door this time, but she lay awake all night listening to the silence, wondering if the man in her barn was the answer to a prayer she'd stopped saying, or the beginning of something she wouldn't survive. They left before the sun cleared the ridge. Clara walked ahead because she knew the trail and because she didn't want Ethan Hale seeing her face. She hadn't slept. Her eyes were swollen and her leg throbbed worse than usual. The heat did that, turned the old burn into something alive, something that remembered the fire even when she tried to forget. Lily stayed behind with Biscuit. Ethan hadn't wanted to leave her, but Clara told him straight. "If Cutter's men come back and find us both gone with the child, they'll use it. They'll say we abandoned her. They'll say worse." Ethan had looked at his daughter for a long time. Then he knelt down and said, "You lock the barn door from inside. You don't open it for anyone but me or Miss Clara. Trust?" Lily nodded. No tears, no protest. Just a child who understood danger the way no child should. That was the thing about Lily that broke Clara open. The girl had already learned to be brave, and she was only 7. They walked in silence for nearly a mile before Ethan spoke. "The fire that hurt your leg." Clara didn't slow down. "What about it?" "You said it looked like an accident." "I said it was made to look like an accident." "Who did it?" Clara stopped walking. She turned around and faced him on the narrow trail. "You ask a lot of questions for a man who won't answer mine." "I know." "Then maybe you should start giving before you keep taking." Ethan pulled off his hat and held it against his chest. A gesture of respect. Old-fashioned. The kind of thing her father used to do when he was about to say something that mattered. "My wife didn't die of sickness," he said. "She died because I made enemies of powerful men, and they took the only thing I couldn't protect." Clara felt the ground shift under her feet. Not literally. Something deeper. "What kind of enemies?" "The kind who control water, land, and law, and don't see a difference between the 3. Clara stared at him. Her heart was hammering, and she didn't know if it was from the walk or from the way he looked at her when he said it. Direct, raw, like a man cutting himself open to prove he wasn't hiding a weapon. "You're not a drifter," she said. "No, ma'am." "And you didn't stumble into Wind Hollow by accident." "No." "Then what are you?" "Right now, I'm a man asking you to trust me for 2 more hours. After you see the reservoir, I'll tell you everything. Every single thing. And if you want me gone after that, I'll take Lily and go before dark." Clara's jaw tightened. Trust wasn't something she had in stock. She'd spent it all on a husband who died and a town that turned its back on her the same week they buried him. But this man had put his body between armed riders and his sleeping daughter. He'd fixed her trough, her barn wall, her gate, never once asking for more than he'd been given. "2 hours," she said. "Then I want the truth, or I want you gone." "Deal." They kept walking. The reservoir sat in the shallow canyon about 2 miles northeast of town. It wasn't natural. It had been dammed and redirected from the Carver River by a territory grant 15 years ago. The water belonged to Wind Hollow. All of it. Enough to sustain every ranch, every farm, every family in the valley through even the worst drought. But when they reached the overlook, Clara watched Ethan's face change. His eyes moved across the reservoir, then down to the diversion channels, then to the series of locked gates that controlled the flow into town. "Those locks," he said. "Who holds the keys?" "Cutter." "Only Cutter. And the town voted for this?" Clara let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "The town didn't vote for anything. Cutter installed those gates 2 years ago, said it was for water management, said the drought required controlled distribution. What it really meant was he decides who drinks and who doesn't. And the territorial governor? The governor's office is 300 miles away. They sent a letter once asking for a report. Cutter wrote the report himself." Ethan crouched down and studied the channels. He was quiet for a long time. When he stood up, his face was different, harder. Clara had seen men get angry before. Loud, red-faced, fist-pounding angry. This wasn't that. This was the kind of anger that built things instead of breaking them. "He's diverting almost 40% of the flow," Ethan said. "To where?" "To his own holdings. Look at the eastern channel. It runs directly away from town toward his ranch land. The rest of you are splitting what's left." Clara felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd known Cutter was corrupt. Everyone knew. But hearing it laid out in numbers, seeing it mapped in dirt and stone, that was different. "You understand water systems," she said. It wasn't a question. "I do." "How?" Ethan turned to face her. "Because the territorial governor didn't just send a letter, Clara. He sent me." The silence that followed was so complete, Clara could hear her own pulse. 3 months ago, a group of ranchers from Wind Hollow sent a petition to the governor's office. Claimed the mayor was manipulating water access, inflating contracts, and starving out anyone who opposed him. The governor couldn't send a marshal. No proof of criminal activity, just complaints. So he sent someone else. "A new mayor," Clara whispered. Ethan reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded document. The paper was worn at the creases, soft from being carried close to a body. He handed it to her. Clara unfolded it. Official letterhead, territorial seal, the governor's signature at the bottom, and in the middle, 3 lines that changed everything. "By authority of this office, Ethan James Hale is hereby appointed interim mayor of Wind Hollow, Territory of Arizona, effective upon his arrival and public declaration." Clara's hands were shaking. She folded the letter and handed it back. "You've been in my barn for 6 days." "Yes." "Eating my food, fixing my things, letting your daughter call me Miss Clara." "Yes." "And this whole time, you were the man sent to replace Raymond Cutter?" "I wasn't hiding it from you specifically, Clara. I was hiding it from everyone. I needed to see the town first. See how deep the rot went. See who could be trusted." "And can I be trusted?" He held her gaze without flinching. "You pointed a shotgun at a stranger and then gave his daughter water. You stood on your porch and told Cutter's men to get off your land. You walk on a leg that hurts every single step, and you haven't once asked anyone for help." He paused. "You're the only person in this town I trust." Clara felt her chest crack open again, wider this time, deeper, the way drought-hardened earth splits when the first rain finally hits. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say she trusted him back. She wasn't ready for that. Instead, she said, "Cutter will kill you." "Maybe." "Not maybe. He burned down my barn with my husband inside it because Thomas asked too many questions about the water contracts. You think he won't do worse to a man who's here to take his power?" "I think he'll try." "And Lily?" That landed. Clara saw it hit him, saw his shoulders tighten, saw his jaw clench, saw the father in him collide with the man on a mission. "That's why I haven't announced myself yet," he said quietly. "I need to know she's safe before I move." "She's not safe, not here, not anywhere near you if Cutter finds out." "I know." "Then what's your plan?" "I didn't have one, not a complete one." He looked at her. "I do now." "And what's that?" "I need allies. People Cutter has hurt who are willing to stand up. Farmers, ranchers, widows he's squeezed. I need them in one room, hearing the truth, before Cutter has time to spin it." "You need a town meeting." "I need a reckoning." Clara turned and looked out over the reservoir. All that water, sitting right there, enough for everyone, hoarded by one man's greed. "Margaret Doyle," she said. "The gossip?" "She's more than a gossip. She's a widow, too. Cutter doubled her water fees last spring after her son moved away. She couldn't pay, had to sell off half her cattle." "And she'd testify to that?" "She'd do more than testify. She'd spit in his eye if she thought someone had her back." Clara paused. "That's the problem, Mr. Hale. It ain't that people don't know what Cutter's done. It's that nobody believes anyone's coming to help." "Someone came." "You came, with a child and a goat. Forgive me if the town ain't exactly trembling." Ethan almost smiled. Almost. The corner of his mouth moved, and then it stopped, like he'd forgotten how. "Will you help me?" he asked. Clara looked at him. This man who'd asked for shade and turned out to be the storm. This man who fixed broken things because he couldn't fix the one thing that mattered most. This man whose daughter sang to a goat and called her Biscuit, and somehow, without trying, had made Clara's dead house feel alive again. "I'll help you," she said, "but not for you." "For who, then?" "For every woman in this valley who's been told to be quiet and be grateful. For every widow who's been charged double because there's no man to argue the price. For Thomas, your husband, my husband, who asked the same questions you're asking and died for it." Ethan put his hat back on. "Then we start tonight." They walked back in silence, but it was a different silence now. Not the silence of strangers keeping distance. The silence of two people walking toward the same fire, knowing they might both burn. When they reached the property, Clara saw something that stopped her cold. The barn door was open. Lily was standing outside, Biscuit in her arms, and in front of her, blocking the path to the house, stood Margaret Doyle. Clara's blood went hot. "Margaret." Her voice carried across the yard like a whip crack. "Step away from that child." Margaret turned. Her face was red, but not from anger, from crying. "Clara, I said step away." "I came to warn you," Margaret's voice broke. "Cutter's calling a town meeting tonight. He's going to declare your land forfeit for unpaid water debts. He's got the papers drawn up. He's been planning this for weeks." Clara felt the ground tilt. That's a lie. I paid my fees. You paid what he charged you. He changed the rates last month, backdated them. You owe 3 months' worth at the new price, and he's claiming non-payment as grounds for seizure. Clara couldn't breathe. Her ranch, her land, the only thing she had left of Thomas, of her life, of the woman she'd been before the fire. He can't do that, she said. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew. In Wind Hollow, Raymond Cutter could do whatever Raymond Cutter wanted. Margaret looked past Clara at Ethan. Her eyes narrowed. Who is he, Clara? Really? Clara glanced at Ethan. He gave her the smallest nod. He's the new mayor, Clara said. Margaret stared. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. The new... Are you out of your mind? The territorial governor appointed him. He's got papers. Margaret looked at Ethan like she was seeing him for the first time. Then she looked at Lily. Then back at Ethan. You brought a child into this? I brought my daughter into a town that needs help, Ethan said. Same as any man brings his family where he's called to go. Cutter will eat you alive. Cutter's been eating this town alive for 6 years. I'm here to close his mouth. Margaret Doyle was quiet for a long time. She was a hard woman. Life had made her that way, same as it had made Clara. But hard wasn't the same as heartless, and Clara could see the war playing out behind Margaret's eyes. He took my cattle, Margaret said finally. Her voice was small, smaller than Clara had ever heard it. He took my water, and then he took my cattle, and then he told me I should be grateful he didn't take the house. I know, Ethan said. Do you? Do you know what it's like to be a woman in this town, with nothing and nobody, and a man in a nice office telling you to smile about it? My wife died because men like Cutter believe they own everything, including the people around them. So no, ma'am, I don't know exactly what it's like to be you. But I know what it cost, and I'm here to make sure it stops costing. Margaret wiped her face with the back of her hand. Rough, impatient, the way women cry when they've been told their whole lives not to. What do you need? She asked. Names, Ethan said. Every rancher, every farmer, every widow Cutter has cheated. I need them at Clara's property tomorrow morning. Not the town hall. He controls that. Here, on ground he doesn't own. He's trying to take this ground, Margaret said. Then we'd better move fast. Margaret looked at Clara. You trust him? Clara looked at Ethan, at Lily, who had moved to stand beside her father, one hand gripping his pant leg, the other holding Biscuit. At this man who'd asked for shade and carried a governor's letter next to his heart, and fixed a stranger's irrigation trough because it was the right thing to do. I trust him more than I trust the man who killed my husband, Clara said. Margaret nodded once, sharp, decided. I'll have 12 people here by dawn, she said. Maybe more. The Hendersons lost their north pasture to Cutter's fees. The Dunlaps haven't had running water in 6 weeks. Old Bill Taggart's been sleeping in his barn because Cutter foreclosed on his house, and he's too proud to tell anyone. 12 is enough to start, Ethan said. It ain't enough to finish. No, but it's enough to make him nervous, and nervous men make mistakes. Margaret climbed back into her wagon. She gathered the reins, then stopped. Clara. What? I'm sorry. For the looking, for the whispering, for every time I drove past your gate and didn't stop. Clara's throat closed. She nodded because she couldn't speak. Margaret drove off. The dust hadn't settled before Lily tugged on Clara's hand. Miss Clara? Yes, sweetheart? Is the bad man going to take your house? Clara knelt down, slowly, painfully, her burned leg screaming, until she was eye level with the girl. "Not if I can help it." "Papa won't let him either." Clara looked up at Ethan. He was watching his daughter with an expression Clara recognized, because she'd seen it in her own mirror 1,000 times. It was the face of someone willing to burn for the people they loved. "No," Clara said softly. "I don't reckon he will." Lily leaned forward and wrapped her arms around Clara's neck. Small arms, thin arms, arms that smelled like hay and goat, and the kind of trust that only children carry. Clara held her, and for the first time in 4 years, she let someone hold her back. That night, after Lily fell asleep in the barn with Biscuit curled at her feet, Ethan sat on the porch step, and Clara sat in her chair, and neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Clara said, "If this goes wrong, he won't just take my land. He'll make an example of me. Same way he made an example of Thomas." "I won't let that happen." "You can't promise that." "No, I can't. But I can promise you this. If Cutter comes for you, he comes through me first." "That's a fool's promise, Mr. Hale." "Ethan." She looked at him. "Call me Ethan," he said. "If we're going to war together, you might as well use my name." Clara was quiet for a beat. Then, "If we're going to war together, Ethan, you should know, I don't lose gracefully." "Neither do I." The heat sat heavy on the valley. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called out and got no answer. The stars were thick above them, but the air felt close, pressed down, the way it does before a storm that isn't weather. Clara gripped the arms of her chair and stared out at the dark shape of the barn where a little girl slept, dreaming whatever 7-year-olds dream when the world has already taught them to lock doors. "Dawn," Clara said. "We do this at dawn." "At dawn," Ethan agreed. And somewhere in Wind Hollow, in a fine house with water that never stopped running, Raymond Cutter was looking at a land seizure document with Clara Whitmore's name on it, and smiling like a man who had never once been told no. That smile had 12 hours left. They came at dawn, just like Margaret promised. Clara counted them from the porch. 12, then 14, then 17. Wagons pulling up along the fence line, boots hitting dry dirt, faces drawn tight with the kind of fear that sits right next to courage and looks almost identical. The Hendersons arrived first, Tom and his wife Ruth, both sun-beaten and grim. Tom hadn't spoken to Clara in over a year, not since Cutter told every rancher in the valley that associating with the Whitmore widow would cost them their water allotment. But here he was, hat in hand, standing in her yard like a man who'd finally run out of reasons to stay quiet. "Clara," Tom said. "Tom." "Ruth wanted to come. I didn't want to. She told me if I didn't get in the wagon, she'd drive herself." He glanced at his wife. "So here I am." Ruth Henderson stepped forward. "Where's this mayor of yours?" Ethan came out of the barn with Lily at his side. He'd cleaned up as best he could, shaved, tucked his shirt, brushed the dust off his boots. But it wasn't his clothes that made people look twice. It was the way he walked. Steady, unhurried, like a man who'd already decided what he was willing to lose. Lily held Biscuit against her chest. The goat had a ribbon tied around its neck. Clara didn't know where the girl had found it. "This him?" Tom Henderson said, looking at Ethan the way you look at a horse someone's trying to sell you. "This is him," Clara said. "He don't look like a mayor." "Neither did Cutter, and you voted for him twice." Tom's mouth snapped shut. Margaret Doyle arrived next, and behind her came the Dunlops, a young couple with twin boys who hadn't bathed in weeks because they didn't have enough water. Then old Bill Taggart, who walked because he'd sold his horse to pay Cutter's fees. Then the Garcias, the Petersons, the widow Crane, who hadn't left her property in 8 months. 17 people standing in Clara Whitmore's yard before the sun was fully up. 17 people who had been afraid for years. Ethan didn't make them wait. He stepped onto the porch, not above them, just high enough to be heard, and he held up the governor's letter. My name is Ethan Hale. 3 months ago, a petition from this town reached the territorial governor's desk. It described a mayor who'd seized control of public water, inflated contracts, and systematically bankrupted anyone who opposed him. The governor couldn't send a marshal without evidence of criminal conduct, so he sent me. Silence. The kind that's louder than shouting. Tom Henderson spoke first. You got proof you are who you say? This letter carries the governor's seal and signature. Anyone who wants to examine it can do so. Letters can be forged. They can. But water diversions can't be faked. I've seen your reservoir. Cutter is redirecting nearly 40% of the town's water supply to his own ranch land. The rest of you are splitting what's left, and he's charging you triple for the privilege. A murmur moved through the group. Not surprise, confirmation. They'd all suspected. Hearing it out loud was different. Ruth Henderson's voice cut through the noise. We've known this for years. No one ain't the problem. The problem is Cutter owns the sheriff. He owns the general store. He owns half the mortgages in this valley. What are you going to do that's any different from what my husband tried to do 2 years ago? What did your husband try? Ethan asked. Ruth looked at Tom. Tom looked at the ground. I wrote a letter to the territory office, Tom said quietly. Cutter found out. Next week, our north pasture water got cut off. Lost 40 head of cattle in 3 weeks. Who delivered that letter for you? Harold Perkins, at the general store. He has the mail contract. And Perkins reports to Cutter. Tom's face went white. He read my letter. He read every letter this town has ever sent. That's how Cutter stayed ahead. He controls the information the same way he controls the water. Nothing gets out that he doesn't approve. Clara watched the realization move through the group like a wave. She saw it hit each person differently. Anger in some, defeat in others, and in a few, the cold, dawning recognition that they'd been trapped for years by a system designed to keep them trapped. Old Bill Taggart spoke up. His voice was thin but steady. I've lived in Wind Hollow for 31 years. Built my house with my own hands. Cutter took it from me with a piece of paper and a handshake. And when I went to the sheriff told me to be grateful I wasn't being charged with trespassing on my own land. He paused. If you're real, mister, then tell me what you're going to do. Because I'm 72 years old, and I'm sleeping in a barn, and I ain't got time for speeches. Ethan nodded. Fair. Here's what I'm going to do. Tonight, there's a town meeting. Cutter called it to seize Clara Whitmore's land for unpaid water debts. Debts he manufactured by backdating rate changes. I'm going to walk into that meeting, present my appointment, and demand a public audit of every water contract he signed in the last 6 years. He won't allow it, Margaret said. He doesn't have to allow it. The territorial charter gives an appointed interim mayor full authority to call for audits, suspend contracts, and reassign public resources pending investigation. The moment I declare my appointment publicly, his authority is suspended. And if he refuses to step down, Tom asked, then he's in violation of territorial law, and I can send for a marshal with cause. Send how? Through Perkins? Ethan looked at Clara. She understood immediately. I'll ride to Prescott myself, Clara said, if it comes to that. On that leg? Margaret said. On this leg, on a horse, on my hands and knees if I have to. I've watched this town rot from the inside out for 4 years, Margaret. I'm done watching. Something shifted in the group. Clara felt it. A current, electric and fragile, The moment when a room full of beaten people start believing they might not have to stay beaten. But Tom Henderson wasn't finished. What about his men? Frank Dunbar, Lyle Morrison. Cutter's got at least 6 men who do what he says without question. You walk into that meeting and announce yourself, and they'll drag you out before you finish your first sentence. That's why I'm not walking in alone, Ethan said. He looked at the 17 people standing in Clara's yard. I'm walking in with every one of you. Silence again. But this one was different. This one had weight. Ruth Henderson reached over and took her husband's hand. Tom flinched, then held on. Old Bill Taggart straightened his back, slowly, painfully, the way a man does when he's decided to stand, even though standing costs him everything. I'll be there, Bill said. So will I, Margaret said. One by one they spoke. The Dunlaps, the Garcias, the Petersons. The widow Crane, who hadn't raised her voice above a whisper in months, said yes so loud it startled her own self. Clara felt tears pressing behind her eyes. She held them. Not because she was strong, but because she knew if she started crying now, she might not stop. And there was still a war to fight before she could afford the luxury of breaking down. Tonight, Ethan said, 7 o'clock, Town Hall. We walk in together, and we don't walk out until this is finished. They left in ones and twos, the way they'd come, trying not to be noticed. But Clara saw something different in how they walked away. Their shoulders were higher. Their steps were harder. They moved like people who'd remembered what it felt like to have a reason to move. By noon, the yard was empty, except for Clara, Ethan, Lily, and Biscuit. Lily was sitting on the porch step, feeding the goat bits of dried grass. Papa? Yes, sweetheart? Are those people scared? Yes. Are you scared? Ethan crouched down beside her. Yes, Lily, I am. Mama used to say being scared is just your heart running ahead of your feet. Ethan closed his eyes, just for a second. When he opened them, they were wet, and he didn't try to hide it. Your mama was the smartest person I ever knew. I know, Lily smiled. She told me that too. Clara turned away. She went inside and gripped the edge of the kitchen table and let her shoulders shake for exactly 10 seconds. Then she straightened up, splashed water on her face, and walked back out. We need to talk about Lily, Clara said. Ethan stood. I know. She can't be at that meeting. I know. If things go wrong, if Cutter's men get violent, she can't be in that building. Where do I take her? You don't take her anywhere. She stays here, with me. Ethan stared at her. You're not coming to the meeting? One of us needs to be at that meeting, and one of us needs to be with your daughter. You're the one with the papers. You're the one the governor sent. It has to be you in that room. Clara, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm telling. That little girl stays with me, and if anything happens to you tonight, I will put her on a horse and ride to Prescott myself, and I will not stop until the governor sends an army. Do you understand me? Ethan's jaw worked. She could see him fighting it. Every instinct in him that said he should keep his daughter close. Every fear that said letting her out of his sight was the same as losing her. She'll be safe, Clara said, softer now. I promise you. You can't promise that. No, but I can promise I'll die before I let anyone touch her. And you know I mean it. He did know. She could see that he knew. Okay, he said. The word came out rough, broken at the edges. Okay. Clara put her hand on his arm. First time she touched him voluntarily. His skin was warm, and his muscle was tight, and she pulled her hand away before either of them could think about what it meant. "Go get ready," she said. "You've got a town to save." The hours passed like years. Clara spent the afternoon with Lily. They watered what was left of the tomato garden. They brushed Biscuit until the goat's coat almost looked respectable. Lily talked about her mother. Small things, quiet things. The way her mother's hands looked when she kneaded bread. The sound of her voice reading stories at night. The way she always smelled like lavender, even when there wasn't any growing nearby. Clara listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't compare grief or offer platitudes. She just listened, the way she wished someone had listened to her after Thomas died. At 6 o'clock, Ethan came out of the barn wearing the only clean shirt he had. His boots were polished. His hair was combed. He looked like a man walking to his own trial. He knelt in front of Lily. "I have to go do something important tonight." "I know, Papa." "Miss Clara's going to stay with you." "I know." "If anything happens, if I'm not back by midnight, Miss Clara's going to take you somewhere safe." Lily's lower lip trembled, just barely, just enough for her father to see. "You're coming back," Lily said. Not a question, a command. A 7-year-old ordering the universe to behave. "I'm coming back," Ethan said. He kissed her forehead, stood up, looked at Clara. 1,000 things passed between them in that look, things neither of them had words for, things that didn't need words. "Go," Clara said. He went. Clara watched him walk down the road toward town until the dust swallowed him. Then she sat on the porch with Lily and Biscuit and waited for the world to either end or begin again. At 7:15, Clara heard it. Shouting. Carrying across the valley from the direction of town. Distant but unmistakable. The sound of many voices raised at once. Lily pressed closer to her side. "Miss Clara?" "It's okay, sweetheart." "Is Papa okay?" "Your Papa is the bravest man I've ever met. He's okay." She didn't know if that was true. She said it anyway, because that's what you do for children. You build a wall out of words between them and the things that might hurt them. The shouting continued. Rose, fell, rose again. Then, at 7:45, a rider came down the road. Clara stood up. Her hand went to the shotgun by the door. But it wasn't Cutter's men. It was Margaret Doyle, riding hard, face flushed and wild-eyed. "Clara!" Margaret pulled her horse up at the gate, breathing hard. "Clara, you need to come, now!" What happened? He did it. He walked in and he showed the letter and he called for the audit. Cutter tried to have Frank Dunbar throw him out, and Tom Henderson stood up. Then Bill Taggart stood up. Then the whole room stood up. Then what's wrong? Margaret's face changed. The excitement drained out of it, replaced by something colder. Cutter pulled a gun. Clara's blood stopped. He pulled a gun on Ethan, in front of the whole town. Said if any territorial appointee thinks he can walk into his town and take what he built, he'll answer for it. He's holding Ethan at gunpoint in the town hall. Sheriff's there, but he won't intervene. Says it's a civil matter. Clara's vision narrowed to a single point. Her hands stopped shaking. Her legs stopped hurting. Everything in her body went quiet and sharp and focused the way it does when there's no more room for fear, because fear takes time, and time just ran out. "Stay with Lily," Clara said. "Clara, don't stay with Lily." She grabbed the shotgun. She grabbed Thomas's rifle from behind the kitchen door, the one she'd threatened Frank Dunbar with, the one she hadn't fired since her husband's hands last touched it. "Clara, you can't walk in there alone with a gun. That's suicide." I walked alone for 4 years, Margaret. I reckon I can manage one more night. At least wait for what? For him to kill the only honest man this town's seen in a decade? For Lily to lose another parent? I'm done waiting. She looked at Lily. The girl was standing in the doorway, Biscuit in her arms, her eyes enormous and glassy with tears she was fighting not to shed. "Miss Clara?" Clara walked to her, knelt down again, her legs screaming, and took the girl's face in her hands. "I'm going to get your papa." "Promise?" Clara kissed her forehead, the same spot Ethan had kissed an hour ago. "Promise." She stood up and walked down the road toward town. The shotgun was in her right hand. The rifle was slung over her shoulder. Her limp was bad. Every step sent fire up her left side, but she didn't slow down. She could hear the shouting growing louder the closer she got. Men's voices, angry voices, and underneath them all, one voice she recognized, steady, calm, refusing to break. Ethan's voice. The town hall doors were open. Light spilled out into the street. Clara could see shadows moving inside. Too many people, too much motion, the kind of chaos that happens when fear and anger occupy the same room. She stopped at the bottom of the steps. She could hear Cutter now. His voice was different from how she remembered. Higher, thinner, stripped of the smooth charm he usually wore like a costume. "This is my town. I built this town. Every well, every road, every contract. Mine. You think some piece of paper from a governor who's never set foot here changes that?" And Ethan's voice, low and even. "The paper doesn't change it, Raymond. The people standing behind me change it." "These people? These broken-down farmers and widows? They'll scatter the second I cut their water for good." Maybe. Or maybe they've been broken down enough that they've got nothing left to lose. And a person with nothing to lose is the most dangerous thing in the world. Clara heard the sound of a hammer cocking. Her stomach dropped to her boots. She walked up the steps. She pushed through the doorway. The room was packed. Every seat taken. People standing along the walls. The air thick with sweat and fury. At the front of the room, Raymond Cutter stood with a Colt revolver aimed at Ethan's chest. His hand was trembling. His face was white. Ethan stood 3 feet from the barrel. He hadn't moved, hadn't flinched. His hands were at his sides, and his eyes were locked on Cutter's eyes, and he was absolutely, terrifyingly still. Behind Ethan, Tom Henderson and Bill Taggart and the others stood in a ragged line, frozen, afraid, but standing. Frank Dunbar and Cutter's men stood along the far wall, hands on their holsters, waiting for an order. The sheriff sat in a chair in the corner, doing nothing. Clara walked up the center aisle. Every head turned. Cutter saw her. His eyes went to the shotgun in her hand. "Clara Whitmore." He almost laughed. "You going to shoot me, Clara? In front of the whole town?" Clara stopped 10 feet from him. She didn't raise the gun. She didn't need to. "I'm not here to shoot you, Raymond." "Then what are you here for?" Clara's voice was steady, clear, loud enough for every person in that room to hear. "I'm here to ask you a question, in front of everyone." She paused. "Did you kill my husband?" The room went dead silent. Cutter's gun hand wavered, just slightly, just enough. "That fire was an accident, Clara. Everybody knows that." "Everybody was told that. There's a difference." She took one step closer. "Thomas found out about the water diversions. Same thing this man found. Same numbers, same theft. And 3 days after Thomas confronted you in this very room, our barn burned down in the middle of the night with him inside it." "You're talking crazy." Am I? Then let me ask the room. Clara turned to face the crowd. How many of you have had an accident after crossing Raymond Cutter? How many of you lost cattle, lost land, lost water, and were told it was just bad luck? Silence. Then Ruth Henderson raised her hand. Then Margaret Doyle, who'd come from Clara's porch and was standing in the back of the room with tears streaming down her face. Then Bill Taggart. Then the Dunlaps. Then the Garcias. Hand after hand after hand. Clara turned back to Cutter. You didn't build this town, Raymond. You strangled it. And every person in this room with her hand raised is proof. Cutter's gun was shaking badly now. His eyes darted from Clara to Ethan to the crowd to his own men against the wall. Frank, Cutter said, get these people out of here. Frank Dunbar didn't move. Frank! Frank looked at his boots. I ain't drawing on women and old men, Raymond. I ain't doing it. Cutter's face crumbled. Not all at once. Piece by piece. The way a dam breaks when there's too much pressure behind it and not enough stone to hold. You're all dead, he whispered. Every last one of you. Without me, this town dies. Without my contracts. Without my reservoir. Your reservoir? Ethan spoke for the first time since Clara entered. That reservoir belongs to Wind Hollow. The territorial charter is clear. Every drop of water in that canyon is public property, and every contract you've written diverting it to your own land is fraud. You can't prove that. I don't have to prove it tonight. I just have to suspend your authority and call for an investigation, which I've already done. Ethan reached into his pocket and held up a second document. Signed, sealed, and effective immediately. Your authority as mayor is suspended, pending a full territorial audit. Cutter stared at the paper, then at the gun in his own hand, then at the room full of people who had once feared him and now stood with their hands raised against him. He lowered the gun, not because he chose to, because the weight of it had finally become too much. The weight of the gun, and the weight of everything he'd done to hold on to power that was never rightfully his. The sheriff stood up from his chair in the corner. I'll take that firearm, Raymond, the sheriff said, speaking for the first time, finally choosing the side that had more people on it. Cutter handed over the Colt. His hand was still shaking. This isn't over, Cutter said. Ethan stepped forward, close enough that only Cutter could hear him. Yes, Raymond, it is. Clara's knees buckled. She caught herself on the back of a chair. The shotgun slipped from her hand and clattered against the floor, and she didn't care, because her body had held together exactly long enough, and now it was finished holding. Tom Henderson caught her arm. Easy, Clara, easy. I'm fine. You ain't fine. You just walked a mile on a bad leg, carrying 2 guns to face down a man with a pistol. You ain't fine, and that's okay. Clara looked across the room at Ethan. He was looking back at her, and in his eyes she saw something she hadn't seen in a man's face since Thomas. Not gratitude, not admiration, not pity. Recognition. The look of someone who sees you, all of you, the broken parts and the brave parts and the parts you hide, and doesn't look away. Clara held his gaze across that crowded, sweating, terrified, triumphant room, and she nodded once. He nodded back. And in the doorway of the town hall, small enough to be missed, Lily Hale stood holding Biscuit the goat and Margaret Doyle's hand, watching her father survive the night she'd ordered the universe to let him survive. Clara didn't remember the walk home. She remembered Tom Henderson's hand under her arm. She remembered the sound of boots on packed dirt. She remembered Lily's small fingers finding hers somewhere in the dark and holding on like a rope thrown to a drowning person. But the walk itself, the mile between town hall and her porch, was gone. Her body had spent everything it had in that room, and now it was collecting the debt. She made it to the porch steps and sat down hard. Her left leg had stopped hurting, which was worse than pain. Numbness meant swelling. Swelling meant she'd pushed the old burn too far. She'd pay for it in the morning. Lily sat next to her. Biscuit lay at their feet, the goats breathing slow and steady, the calmest creature on the property.
"Miss Clara?"
"Yes, sweetheart."
"You were really brave."
Clara almost laughed. "I was really stupid."
"Mama said brave and stupid are cousins."
"Your mama was right about everything, wasn't she?"
"Almost everything. She said Papa couldn't cook, but he makes okay biscuits."
Clara did laugh then, short and ragged, but real. Margaret Doyle stood by her wagon, arms crossed, watching the road. She hadn't said a word since the town hall. Clara knew Margaret was keeping watch, not because anyone had asked her to, but because that was Margaret. Hard on the outside, sentry on the inside.
"You should go home, Margaret."
"I'll go when I'm good and ready."
"It's over."
"It ain't over till that man's in a jail cell. Lowering a gun ain't the same as giving up. You know that, Clara." Clara did know that. She just didn't have the energy to carry that truth tonight. 30 minutes passed before Ethan came up the road. Clara heard his footsteps before she saw him. Steady, measured. The walk of a man processing something enormous and forcing himself to do it one step at a time. He came through the gate and stopped when he saw them. Clara on the steps, Lily beside her, Margaret by the wagon, Biscuit at their feet. Lily stood up. She didn't run to him. She walked, deliberately, carefully, the way her father walked, and she wrapped her arms around his waist and pressed her face against his shirt and held on. Ethan put his hand on her head. His fingers were trembling. "I told you," Lily said into his shirt. "I told you you were coming back." "You told me." His voice cracked on the second word. He cleared his throat. "You told me." Clara watched them, father and daughter, standing in her yard, holding each other in the dark. She felt something open in her chest that she'd been holding shut for 4 years. Not a wound reopening, but a door. A door she'd nailed shut the night Thomas died. And now it was creaking open, whether she wanted it to or not. Margaret broke the silence. What happened after Clara left? Ethan kept one hand on Lily's head and turned to face them. "Sheriff took Cutter's weapon. Cutter's men, Dunbar, Morrison, the rest, they didn't fight. Once Frank backed down, the others followed." "Where's Cutter now?" "Sheriff locked him in the holding cell. Not for the gun. Technically, he didn't fire it. For outstanding charges I filed under the Territorial Authority. Fraud, misappropriation of public resources, and obstruction." "Will they stick?" Clara asked. "The fraud charges will. I've seen the diversion channels with my own eyes, and I've got 17 witnesses who can testify to inflated water contracts. The governor will send an auditor, probably a marshal too, once my report reaches Prescott." "How will your report reach Prescott? Perkins controls the mail." Ethan reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. "Tom Henderson volunteered to ride at first light. He knows a postal route through Wickenburg that bypasses Perkins entirely." Clara stared at him. "Tom Henderson, who didn't want to come this morning?" "Tom Henderson, who stood up in that room before anyone else. People surprise you when you give them a reason to." Margaret snorted. "People surprise you when they're more scared of the alternative." "That too," Ethan said. Margaret climbed into her wagon. "I'm going home. If Cutter's boys come around tonight, you fire that shotgun twice, and I'll hear it from my place."
"Margaret,"
Clara said.
"What?"
"Thank you." Margaret's jaw tightened. She gathered the reins and looked straight ahead. "Don't thank me. I should have done this years ago. We all should have." She snapped the reins and pulled away into the dark, her back straight, her head high, carrying guilt and relief in equal measure. Clara, Ethan, and Lily sat on the porch in silence for a long time. Lily fell asleep first, curled against Clara's side, biscuit tucked under her arm. The girl made small sounds in her sleep. Not quite words, not quite sighs. The sounds of a child who'd learned to sleep lightly. Clara looked down at her. "She's too young for all of this." "I know." "She shouldn't have been at that town hall. Margaret was supposed to keep her at the house. Lily doesn't stay where she's put. She never has. Her mother was the same way." Clara ran her fingers through Lily's hair, gently, automatically, the way she'd once imagined doing for a child of her own, before the fire took that possibility along with everything else. "You need to tell me about your wife," Clara said. Ethan was quiet. "Not tonight. Not the details. But enough so I understand what I'm standing next to." He took off his hat and held it in both hands. "Her name was Sarah. We lived in a town called Ridgewater, up north. I was a surveyor for the Territorial Land Office. I found irregularities in a land grant. A rancher named Colton Briggs had forged documents to claim water rights that belonged to the public. Same game as Cutter. Same game, different table. I reported it. Briggs was powerful. He had friends in the Territory office. My report got buried, and I got fired." "And Sarah?" Ethan's hands tightened on the hat brim. "Briggs sent men to our house. Not to hurt us, to scare us, to make us leave town. Sarah was home with Lily. The men came in while I was gone. They didn't touch them, but they tore up the house, broke everything. Sarah put Lily under the bed and stood in front of the bedroom door and didn't move until they left." Clara's throat closed. 2 weeks later, Sarah got sick. Doc said it was pneumonia. But I watched her. I watched her stop sleeping, stop eating, stop leaving the house. She'd check the locks 8, 10 times a night. She'd sit by Lily's bed and not move for hours. The fear didn't leave her body. It stayed, and it grew, and it poisoned her from the inside. "That's not pneumonia." "No, it's not. But that's what the doc wrote on the certificate, and that's what I tell Lily. Because she's 7, and she doesn't need to know that her mother died of a fear my choices put in her." Clara reached across the space between them and took his hand. She didn't think about it. She didn't give herself time to think about it. She just took it. His hand was calloused, rough, and shaking. "You didn't kill your wife, Ethan." "I put her in harm's way." "Briggs put her in harm's way. You tried to do the right thing. Trying doesn't count when the people you love pay the price." Clara squeezed his hand. "Listen to me. I spent 4 years believing Thomas's death was my fault because I didn't fight harder when he wanted to confront Cutter. I told myself if I'd argued more, pushed harder, locked him in the house, maybe he'd still be alive. And you know what that belief did? It ate me alive. It turned me into a woman who pointed shotguns at strangers and kept her doors locked and let the town treat her like a ghost because I thought I deserved to be haunted." Ethan looked at her. "Sarah's death is not your debt to carry, and Thomas's death is not mine. The men who caused those deaths, they carry the debt. And tonight, one of them started paying." Ethan didn't say anything for a long time. His hand stayed in hers. His breathing slowed. And in the silence between them, something settled. Not romance, not desire. Something older and more necessary. The recognition of shared weight, put down for the first time in years, resting on the ground between them instead of on their shoulders. "I need to tell you something else," Ethan said. Clara waited. The governor didn't just send me to investigate Cutter. He sent me to replace him. Permanently. The appointment letter gives me interim authority, but the governor expects me to stay, build this town back, serve as mayor until an election can be held. I know what the letter says. What it means is, I'm not leaving, Clara. This isn't a job I finish and move on from. If I do this right, Wind Hollow becomes my home. Lily's home. Clara felt her pulse quicken. She kept her face steady. And you're telling me this, why? Because I'm sleeping in your barn, and if I'm staying in Wind Hollow, I need to find my own ground. I need to stand on my own before this town will trust me, and I can't do that from inside your fence line. Clara pulled her hand away. Not fast, slow, deliberate. The way you pull back from a fire when you realize you've been standing too close. You're leaving. I'm not leaving. I'm stepping across the road. Cutter's house is public property. It comes with the office. I'll move there tomorrow. The big house, the one with running water and a real roof. It's the mayor's residence, Clara. It's where the town expects their mayor to live. Clara stood up, carefully, so she didn't wake Lily. Her legs screamed as she straightened it, and she let the pain sharpen her, because sharp was better than what she was actually feeling, which was something soft and terrified and entirely too close to heartbreak. So that's how it goes, she said. You sleep in my barn, you eat my food, you fix my things. Your daughter calls me Miss Clara, like I'm someone who matters. And then you walk across the road and become the mayor in the big house? Just like that. Clara, I'm not finished. Her voice was low, controlled, dangerous. I walked a mile on a leg that doesn't work to face down a man with a gun for you tonight. Not for the town, not for justice, for you. Because I looked at your daughter and I saw every child I'll never have. And I looked at you and I saw the first honest man I've met since they put my husband in the ground. And now you're telling me you're moving to the big house because the town needs to see you standing on your own? That's what I'm telling you. Then hear what I'm telling you. I have stood on my own for 4 years, alone, on a leg that burns every single day, in a house that still smells like smoke if the wind blows right. I don't need another man who shows up, makes me feel something, and then walks across the road to a better life. I have had enough of that to last me the rest of my days. Ethan stood. I'm not walking to a better life. I'm walking to a harder one. You think I want that house? You think I want to sit in the same chair Raymond Cutter sat in and sign the same kind of papers he signed? I'd rather stay in your barn for the rest of my life. But if I do that, if I stay here, this town will say I'm your man. They'll say every decision I make is because of you. They'll use you against me the same way Cutter used water against them. And I will not let you become a weapon someone uses to hurt this town. Clara's anger faltered, not because he was wrong, but because he was right. And being right when she wanted him to be wrong was the cruelest thing he could do. I hate this, she whispered. I know. I hate that you're right. I know that too. And I hate that you fixed my irrigation trough and my barn wall and my front gate, and you can't fix this. Ethan stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off him in the night air. Close enough that, if she reached out, she could touch him. She didn't. Clara, listen to me. I'm moving across the road. Not across the country. Not out of your life. Across the road. Lily will be here every morning to check on Biscuit. I'll be here every time something breaks. And when this town holds its first election and decides whether they want me or someone else, I'll know, and you'll know, that whatever we are to each other, it was built on solid ground, not on a barn floor. Clara's eyes burned. She blinked hard. You talk real pretty for a man who sleeps with goats." Ethan almost smiled. That same almost smile she'd seen before. The corner of his mouth that moved and then stopped, like it was out of practice. "I learned from a woman who argues with shotgun-wielding mayors in her spare time." Clara looked at him, really looked at him, past the clean shirt and the polished boots and the governor's letter in his vest pocket, past the calm voice and the steady hands. She looked at the man underneath, the one who'd lost a wife and carried the guilt like a stone in his chest, the one who knelt in the dirt to talk to his daughter like she was the most important person in the world, the one who asked for shade when he needed salvation. "Across the road," she said. "Across the road. And Lily stays with me during the transition. If you'll have her." "If I'll have her." Clara shook her head. "That girl's had me since the minute she told me plants are like people." Ethan extended his hand. Formal, old-fashioned. The way men and women sealed agreements in a world where a handshake still meant something. Clara took it, held it, let go. "Tomorrow," she said. Tomorrow. He went to the barn. She heard him settle into the straw, heard Lily murmur in her sleep, heard Biscuit shift and sigh. Clara sat back down on the porch steps. Her leg was throbbing. Her chest was tight. Her eyes were wet, and she let them be wet, because there was nobody watching. And even if there was, she'd earned the right to cry. She'd carried a shotgun into a room full of fury to save a man she'd known for 6 days. She'd promised a 7-year-old she'd die to protect her. She'd faced down the man who murdered her husband and forced a room full of cowards to raise their hands. And now the man in her barn was moving across the road, because doing the right thing and doing the easy thing had never once in Clara Whitmore's life been the same thing. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and looked up at the sky. Thomas was up there somewhere, or nowhere, or everywhere. She'd never decided which she believed, but she talked to him anyway, the way she did on nights when the world was too heavy for one person. "I think you'd like him," she said quietly. "I think you'd tell me to stop being stubborn and let him in." No answer. There never was. Just the heat and the dark and the sound of a little girl breathing in a barn that used to be empty. Clara stood up, went inside, and locked the door. This time, she knew why. Not to keep anyone out. To give herself one last night of being alone. Because she had a feeling, deep in the part of her that still believed in things despite everything, that she wouldn't be alone much longer. At first light, Tom Henderson rode for Prescott. Clara watched him go from the porch, coffee in one hand, the other resting on the rail. Her leg was swollen and stiff, just like she'd predicted. She'd wrapped it with a wet cloth, but the heat would dry it within the hour. Ethan was already up, already moving. He'd packed his few things into a saddlebag, and now he stood in the yard with Lily, explaining what was about to happen. "We're moving into the mayor's house today." "Why can't we stay here?" "Because Papa has a job to do, and the people in this town need to see him doing it." "Miss Clara's house is better." "Miss Clara's house is special. That's why we're not going to use it up." Lily considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice. "Can Biscuit come?" "Biscuit stays here. Miss Clara needs the company." Lily turned to Clara. "Is that true? Do you need company?" Clara's throat tightened. "More than you know, sweetheart." Lily nodded, satisfied. Then she walked to Clara and hugged her. Hard. Fierce. The hug of a child who has learned that people leave and is determined to hold on anyway. "I'll come every morning," Lily said. "I'll be here every morning." Ethan picked up the saddlebag. He looked at Clara across the yard. The same look from the town hall. the one that saw everything and stayed anyway. "Thank you," he said, "for the shade." Clara's lip trembled. She bit it still.
Don't let that house change you, Ethan Hale.
"I won't."
Because the man who slept in my barn is better than any man who's ever lived in that house.
"I know. That's why I'm taking him with me." He tipped his hat. Lily waved. They walked down the road toward town, and Clara watched them go. The tall man and the small girl, and the distance between them and her growing with every step. Biscuit bleated from the barn.
I know,
Clara said to the goat.
I know.
She went inside and sat at the kitchen table and pressed her palms flat against the wood and breathed. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to feel like death, and now felt like something else. Something she didn't have a name for yet, but it sat in her chest like a seed, small, waiting, needing nothing but time and rain to become something she'd recognize. Clara Whitmore had survived a fire, a husband's murder, 4 years of silence, a corrupt mayor, a drought, and a town that had tried to erase her. She could survive a man moving across the road. She just wasn't sure she wanted to anymore. Surviving had gotten so heavy. And for the first time in 4 years, someone had offered to carry half the weight. She poured herself another cup of coffee, wrapped her leg again, and waited for morning to decide what happened next. 3 days passed, and Lily came every morning, just like she promised. She'd show up at Clara's gate before the sun was fully up, Biscuit bleeding from the barn the second she heard the girl's footsteps. Lily would check the tomato plants, pour whatever water Clara had rationed into the trenches she'd dug, and sit on the porch, talking to the goat like they were catching up on the night's events. Clara lived for those mornings. She hated that she lived for them, but she did. On the 4th day, Lily arrived with news.
Papa found papers in the mayor's house.
Clara was wrapping her leg on the porch. She stopped.
What kind of papers? The kind that made him go quiet. He sat at the desk for a real long time and didn't move. I asked him what was wrong, and he said, "Nothing, sweetheart." But he was lying. I can always tell when Papa's lying because his left eye gets smaller.
Clara set down the bandage. Did he say anything else?
He said he needed to talk to you. He said, "Tell Miss Clara I'll come by tonight." And then he said, "Tell her to have coffee ready." And then he said something under his breath that I think was a cuss word, but I'm not sure because he whispered it.
Clara almost smiled. Almost. Go check on Biscuit. She's fine. I already checked. She ate a whole turnip yesterday. She's getting fat, Miss Clara.
Go check on her anyway.
Lily skipped off to the barn. Clara finished wrapping her leg and stared at the road toward town. Papers. In Cutter's house. The kind that made a man go quiet. Her stomach turned over. She'd learned to trust the dread. Dread had kept her alive when optimism would have gotten her killed. Ethan came at sundown. He didn't sit on the bottom step this time. He sat in Thomas's chair, the one on the porch Clara hadn't let anyone sit in for 4 years. She saw him do it and felt something sharp move through her. And then she let it pass, because holding on to every piece of grief was its own kind of prison, and she was tired of the cell. He had a leather folder in his hands, worn, old, the kind that closes with a strap. I found Cutter's private records, he said, hidden behind a false panel in the study. The man kept everything, every deal, every payment, every bribe. Including Thomas? Ethan opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He held it, but didn't hand it to her. Not yet. Clara, what I'm about to show you, it's going to hurt.
Everything hurts. Show me.
He handed her the paper. Clara read it. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was steady. Everything about her was steady. except the place behind her ribs where her heart used to beat in a rhythm she recognized. Because now it was beating in a rhythm she didn't. Fast and sharp and broken. The paper was a payment receipt, dated 3 days before the barn fire, made out to a man named Virgil Cross. The amount was $200. The notation at the bottom, in Cutter's own handwriting, read, "Whitmore problem. Permanent solution." Clara read it twice, 3 times, 4 times. Then she folded it, set it on her knee, and stared straight ahead. "He paid someone," she said. Her voice was flat, empty. The voice of a woman who had suspected the truth for 4 years and was now holding it in her hands and discovering that confirmation was worse than suspicion. Because suspicion left room for doubt, and doubt was the only mercy she'd had. "Virgil Cross," Ethan said. "I searched the rest of the records. Cross was a hired man from Tucson. Cutter used him twice before, once to set fire to a competitor's grain storage, once to poison a well on disputed land. After the barn fire, Cross received a second payment and left the territory." "He's gone?" "He's dead. Killed in a bar fight in El Paso 8 months after the fire. There won't be a trial." Clara closed her eyes. She felt the ground pulling at her. Not the physical ground, the other kind. The gravitational pull of grief that wants to drag you under and hold you there forever. "He murdered my husband for $200. He murdered your husband because your husband was going to expose the same corruption I'm exposing now." Thomas was right, Clara. Everything he suspected was true, and Cutter killed him for it. Clara opened her eyes. They were dry. She'd expected tears and found none. There was a place beyond tears, a desert inside the desert, and she was standing in it. "I want him to hang," she said. "The territorial court will decide that." "I don't care what the territorial court decides. I want him to hang." "Clara, don't." She held up her hand. "Don't tell me about courts and process and justice. A man paid $200 to burn my husband alive, and I spent 4 years thinking it was my fault for not stopping Thomas from asking questions. 4 years, Ethan. Carrying that, believing that. Do you understand what that does to a person?" "Yes," he said quietly. "I do." She looked at him, and she saw that he did. Because he'd carried the same weight, different name, different town, same crushing certainty that the people they loved had died because of choices they'd made. "This goes to the marshal," Ethan said. "Tom Henderson's letter will bring them within the week. When they arrive, I hand them this folder. Every document, every payment, every name. Cutter won't just lose his office. He'll stand trial for murder. And if he doesn't hang, then he rots in a territorial prison for the rest of his natural life. And everyone in Wind Hollow will know the truth about what he did. To Thomas, to you, to all of them." Clara picked up the receipt again. She ran her thumb across Cutter's handwriting, those neat, careful letters spelling out her husband's death like a ledger entry. $200. Permanent solution. "I want to see him," she said. "Clara, that's not... I want to see him, in that cell. I want to look him in the face, and I want him to know that I know. That's all. Just that." Ethan steadied her. She could see him weighing it, the risk, the emotion, the possibility that she'd walk into that jail and do something she couldn't take back. "I'll go with you," he said. "No, this I do alone. Clara, you gave me the truth. Let me decide what to do with it." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Tomorrow morning, I'll tell the sheriff to expect you." "Thank you." Ethan stood. He set the folder on the chair. "Keep this. It's yours more than anyone's. He walked to the edge of the porch and stopped. His back was to her. She could see the tension in his shoulders. A man who wanted to say something and was fighting himself over whether to say it. "What?" Clara said. "Nothing." "Ethan Hale, you're the worst liar I've ever met. And I married a man who once told me he didn't eat the last of my pie while he had crumbs on his shirt. What is it?" He turned around. "I'm afraid for you." "Of Cutter?" "Of what this does to you. You've spent 4 years building a wall to survive behind. That wall kept you alive. And now I've handed you a piece of paper that's going to tear it down. And I'm afraid of what's on the other side." Clara stood up. Her leg protested. She ignored it. What's on the other side is a woman who finally knows the truth. And a woman who knows the truth is more dangerous than a woman with a shotgun. That's what scares me. Good. You should be a little scared of me, Mr. Mayor. Keeps things honest. She saw it then, the smile. Not almost. Not the corner of his mouth. A real, full, unguarded smile that broke across his face like the sunrise they'd been waiting weeks for. It lasted 2 seconds, and then it was gone. But Clara caught it and held it, and put it in the same place she kept Lily's hugs and Biscuit's bleeding, and the sound of rain that hadn't come yet, but would. "Good night, Clara." "Good night, Ethan." He left. She sat in Thomas's chair and held the folder against her chest and breathed. The next morning, Clara walked into town for the first time since the night she'd carried a shotgun into the meeting hall. People stared. She expected that. But the stares were different now. Not suspicious, not pitying. Something else. Something that looked almost like respect, but felt more complicated. The way people look at someone who did the thing they were all too afraid to do. Harold Perkins stepped out of the general store as she passed. "Clara?" She didn't stop. "Harold? I want you to know, I didn't read all the letters. Some of them I just held. Cutter would come by and ask what was in the mail, and I'd tell him. But I didn't read them all." Clara stopped. She turned and looked at him. Harold was sweating. His hands were twisting a rag that was already twisted beyond recognition. "You told him about Thomas's letter," she said. Harold's face collapsed. "I'm sorry, Clara. I didn't know what he'd do. I swear to God, I didn't know he'd—" "Stop." Clara's voice was steel. "You didn't know he'd kill my husband. Fine. I believe you. But you knew he was dangerous, and you handed him information anyway. And you've been handing him information for 6 years. You helped him control this town, Harold. Every letter you reported, every name you gave up, that was you choosing his side." I was scared. We were all scared. Some of us were scared and still did the right thing. Harold had tears running down his face. Clara looked at him and felt nothing. Not forgiveness, not rage, nothing. That was its own kind of answer. "You want to make it right?" she said. "Yes, please." "Then when the marshal gets here, you tell them everything. Every letter you reported. Every name Cutter asked for. All of it." "I will. I swear." "Don't swear to me. Swear to the 17 people who raised their hands in that meeting. Swear to the families Cutter destroyed with information you gave him." She turned and kept walking. Harold Perkins stood in the doorway of his store, crying into a rag, and Clara didn't look back. The sheriff's office was a small building next to the town hall. The sheriff, a man named Dale Pruitt, who had spent 6 years pretending not to see what was happening in his own town, was sitting at his desk when Clara walked in. "Mrs. Whitmore?" "Sheriff?" "Mayor Hale said you'd be coming." "Then you know why I'm here." Pruitt shifted in his chair. "I can give you 10 minutes, that's all." I won't need 10. He led her to the back. One cell, iron bars, a cot, a bucket, and Raymond Cutter sitting on the edge of the cot with his hands folded in his lap like a man waiting for a train. He looked smaller. That was the first thing Clara noticed. In his office, in the meeting hall, on the street, Cutter had always seemed larger than life. Broad shoulders, booming voice, a smile that could fill a room or empty one depending on his mood. But in that cell, with his jacket gone and his hair uncombed and his eyes carrying the flat, dull weight of a man who knew it was over, he looked small. Ordinary. The kind of man you'd pass on the street and never think about twice. That was the most terrifying part. That a man this ordinary could cause this much damage. Clara. He didn't stand, didn't smile. Come to gloat? No. Then what? Clara stepped closer to the bars. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the receipt. She unfolded it and held it up so he could see it. Virgil Cross, she said. $200. Permanent solution. Cutter's face didn't change. Not at first. Then, slowly, something cracked behind his eyes. Not guilt, not remorse, but the recognition that his secrets had outlived his power. Where'd you find that? Your house, your records, your handwriting. That could mean anything. It means you paid a man to murder my husband, and you kept the receipt like a business expense. Cutter leaned forward. Thomas was going to ruin this town. He didn't understand the contracts. He didn't understand the infrastructure. He wanted to tear down everything I'd built over a few numbers he didn't like. He wanted to give people their water back. Their water. Cutter's lip curled. There is no their water. Water is a resource. Resources require management. Management requires authority. Your husband wanted to take authority away from the one person who knew how to use it. You're still justifying it. Clara's voice was steady, but underneath it, something was breaking. Not her composure, but the last thread of whatever had kept her connected to the version of the world where Thomas's death was an accident. That thread had been thin for 4 years, and now it snapped. You killed him, and you're sitting in a jail cell, and you're still telling yourself you were right? I was right. You were a thief and a murderer, and every person in this town who ever shook your hand or voted for you or looked the other way, they'll know it now. Every one of them. Cutter stood up. He walked to the bars, close enough that Clara could smell him. Sweat and dust and something sour. The smell of a man decomposing from the inside. You think your new mayor is any different? He said. You think Ethan Hale won't sit in my chair and make the same choices I made when the pressure comes? Power doesn't change, Clara. Only the name on the door changes. Clara folded the receipt and put it back in her pocket. You're wrong about him. I'm wrong? You're wrong because you think power is about control. Ethan thinks power is about repair. And that's a difference you'll never understand, because you've never fixed anything in your life. You've only taken. She turned to leave. Clara! She stopped. Didn't turn around. For what it's worth, Thomas was a good man. I wish it hadn't been necessary. Clara's hands clenched at her sides. Every muscle in her body wanted to turn around and reach through those bars and break something. But she didn't. Not because she was above it, but because Thomas wouldn't have wanted her to carry that too. Necessary, she repeated. You call murder necessary. I hope the rope feels necessary too. She walked out. Past Sheriff Pruitt, who wouldn't meet her eyes. Past the town hall where she'd stood with a shotgun. past Harold Perkins's store, where the door was now closed and the shades were drawn. She walked all the way home, a mile on a bad leg, just like before. But this time, her hands were empty and her chest was full. Full of grief, full of rage, full of the terrible clarity that comes when the last lie you've been telling yourself finally dies and leaves you standing in the truth with nowhere to hide. She made it to the porch, sat down, and cried. Not the quiet kind, not the dignified kind. The ugly, ragged, body-shaking kind that sounds like an animal in pain and feels like being turned inside out. She cried for Thomas. She cried for the 4 years she'd spent blaming herself. She cried for the woman she'd been before the fire and the woman she'd become after it, and the distance between those two women that felt like a canyon. She was still crying when Lily found her. The girl didn't say a word. She sat down next to Clara and put her small hand on Clara's knee and held it there while Clara fell apart. And she didn't ask why, and she didn't try to fix it, and she didn't say anything at all. She just stayed. When the tears finally stopped, Clara wiped her face and looked at the girl beside her. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. You shouldn't have to see a grown woman cry like that. Mama cried like that sometimes, after the bad men came to our house." Clara's chest seized. "I used to sit with her too," Lily said. "She told me once that crying doesn't mean you're weak. It means your heart got too full and it needed to pour something out." Clara pulled Lily against her side and held her the way she'd never held a child of her own. Held her like the world depended on it, because in that moment, for Clara, it did. "Your mama was the wisest woman who ever lived," Clara whispered. "I know," Lily said. "That's why I remember everything she told me." They sat together until the shadows grew long, and Biscuit came wandering out of the barn, fat on turnips and indifferent to human grief, and nudged Lily's knee with her head. "She's hungry again," Lily said. "That goat is always hungry." "Papa says that's how you know something's alive. It keeps wanting things." Clara looked toward town, toward the big house where Ethan was sitting at a dead man's desk, reading a murderer's files, trying to rebuild something from the wreckage of another man's greed. Wanting things. She'd stopped wanting things 4 years ago. Wanting was dangerous. Wanting meant hoping, and hoping meant risking, and risking meant losing. And she'd already lost so much. But sitting on that porch with a 7-year-old and a fat goat, and the dried salt of tears on her face, Clara felt it. Small, stubborn, persistent as a weed pushing through cracked earth. She wanted. The marshal arrived 6 days later. 2 men on horseback, federal badges, dusty from the 3-day ride from Prescott. Tom Henderson had delivered the letter, and the governor had responded faster than anyone expected. The audit took 2 weeks. Ethan opened every record, every contract, every ledger. The marshals interviewed every family in the valley. Margaret Doyle testified for 3 hours. Old Bill Taggart sat in a chair in the meeting hall and told his story with the patience of a man who had waited decades to be heard. Clara testified about the fire, about Thomas, about the receipt. She held the paper up and read it aloud in a voice that didn't shake. And when she was finished, she looked at Raymond Cutter across the room and watched him understand, for the first time, that he had lost everything. The marshals charged Cutter with fraud, misappropriation of public resources, conspiracy to commit murder, and arson resulting in death. They took him out of Wind Hollow in chains on a Tuesday morning. Clara stood on the main street and watched the wagon roll past. Cutter looked at her through the bars. She held his gaze. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. He did. That evening, Ethan held a town meeting. Not like the last one. No guns, no shouting, no fear. Just people in chairs, listening to a man who talked to them like they mattered. He announced that the water gates had been unlocked permanently. Every ranch, every farm, every household in Wind Hollow would receive equal access. The fraudulent contracts were voided. The inflated fees were forgiven. The reservoir belonged to the town again. Old Bill Taggart got his house back. The Dunlops got running water. The Hendersons got their north pasture reconnected. Margaret Doyle got her cattle fees refunded from Cutter's seized accounts. When Ethan finished speaking, the room was quiet. Not the frightened quiet of before. The full quiet. The quiet of people who had been thirsty for years and were finally being offered water. Ruth Henderson stood up first. She started clapping. Tom stood next to her. Then Bill. Then Margaret. Then the whole room. 17 people who had stood in Clara's yard at dawn, plus a dozen more who had been too afraid then, but weren't anymore. Clara stood in the back of the room. She didn't clap. She put her hand over her mouth and pressed hard, because if she let go, she was going to make a sound that wasn't clapping and wasn't crying, and was something in between that she didn't have a name for. Ethan found her eyes across the room. He didn't smile. He just looked at her. Long, steady, full. The way you look at someone who changed your life by opening a door. After the meeting, Clara walked home alone. She didn't need company. She didn't need protection. She walked because her legs worked, both of them, even the bad one. And because the road between town and her ranch had been the loneliest road in the world for 4 years, and she wanted to feel it not be lonely anymore. She was almost to the gate when she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't reach for the shotgun. She didn't tense up. She knew the sound of those boots. "You're supposed to be in the big house, Mr. Mayor." Ethan fell into step beside her.
I am, in a minute. I wanted to walk you home first.
"I've been walking myself home for 4 years.
I know. That's why I wanted to do it. Not because you need me to, because I want to." Clara's step faltered, not from the leg, from the weight of a sentence that simple meaning that much. They walked the rest of the way in silence. At the gate, Ethan stopped. Clara stopped. They stood facing each other in the dark, and the air between them was thick with everything unsaid and everything that didn't need saying. "Lily wants to know if she can bring Biscuit to the mayor's house for a visit," Ethan said. "The goat stays here." "That's what I told her. She said, 'Miss Clara's house is Biscuit's home.' I said, 'Miss Clara's house is a lot of things.'" "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means your house is the first place I've felt safe in 3 years. It means my daughter loves you. It means I walked a girl with a goat across the Arizona territory because I was told there was a town that needed help. And the town did need help. But the person who saved it wasn't me. It was a woman with a limp and a shotgun who opened her barn door to a stranger and didn't ask what he'd done, just what he needed." Clara's eyes were wet again. She let them be. "That's a lot of words for a man who usually talks in 2-sentence answers." "I've been saving them up." "For what?" "For someone worth saying them to." Clara reached out and took his hand. Not a handshake this time, just holding. Her rough fingers against his rough fingers. 2 people who had broken and healed and broken again, standing at a gate in the dark, holding on. "Across the road," she said. "Across the road." "But you come for coffee in the morning." "Every morning." "And Lily comes whenever she wants." "She's going to come before I do." "I know. That's the way it should be." She squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. Then she let go and opened the gate and walked to her porch and sat down in her chair. Not Thomas's chair,
not anymore, just a chair, and watched Ethan Hale walk down the road toward the big house with the lights on and the water running. Biscuit bleated from the barn. "Hush," Clara said. "He'll be back." She leaned back in the chair and looked up at the sky. The stars were sharp and bright and impossibly far away, and the heat was still pressing down, and the drought hadn't broken, and her legs still hurt, and there were 100 things still wrong with the world. But there was water in the reservoir, and a good man across the road, and a little girl who would be at her gate in the morning with a fat goat and a gap-toothed smile. Clara Whitmore closed her eyes and breathed. Deep, full. The kind of breath you take when you've been holding something for so long you forgot you were holding it. And then you let it go, and the whole world gets lighter. She didn't lock the door that night. She left it open. Because in a town that had feared strangers, it was a widow's mercy that rebuilt it. In a valley that was dying of thirst, it was a child's kindness that brought the water back. And in a woman who had given up on wanting things, it was a man who asked for nothing but shade, who made her believe she deserved the sun. Wind Hollow survived the drought. Clara Whitmore survived herself. And the barn door stayed open.